Not all stories tell grand tales, and sometimes the magic is love.
Ho, ho, ho!
The world outside was painted in snow, a soft blanket covering the earth as far as the eye could see. Frost clung to the edges of the windows, the night air crisp and cold. But inside the cottage, warmth reigned. A fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting a golden glow over the wooden walls. The wood was smooth, with a lustrous grain that shimmered in the firelight, its surface worn soft from years of hands brushing against it. In the corner of the room stood a stack of woolen blankets, thick and soft, waiting to wrap around whoever needed them. The smell of freshly baked bread and warm broth filled the air, mingling with the scent of pine logs burning in the fireplace. The cozy home was alive with the feeling of hygge, a deep, soothing sense of comfort and togetherness that filled the room like a warm embrace. Hygge wasn't just the fire or the blankets or even the candlelight. It was the feeling of being safe and warm, surrounded by the people you love. The snow could fall and the wind could howl, but inside there was only peace. And who doesn't love watching the snow fall unless you're stuck outside in a storm? This is the feeling we call hygge. It's the warmth of family and home, the way the soft glow of candles can make even the coldest night feel cozy. It's the sensation of wrapping yourself in a woolen blanket with a cup of hot chocolate in your hands, knowing that everything is right in the world for that one perfect moment. So if you haven't yet gotten into your flannels and grabbed your cocoa, my dear viewer, do so now. For it is in this feeling that our story begins. In the far north, where the Sami people live close to nature, surrounded by fjords and forests, and where the days are short in winter and endless in summer. Here in a small cabin nestled among snow-covered trees lived the family Ragnar. The father, his wife Lotta, their son Gunnar, and their daughter Liegi. They lived simply but richly, with their lives full of the beauty and challenges of the wild north. It was one such winter night long ago when a special friend of theirs, a person of the north like many others, first came into their lives. Let us speak of the man who would become his closest companion. A man not so different from anyone else, but known far and wide for the joy he brings each winter. You know him as Santa Claus, but in this story you will come to know him as a simple man of warmth, love, and deep connection to nature and the land. He goes by many other names, of course, for you see, this Santa may not be the ones you read from childhood of an eternal mortal living in the North Pole, bringing children the world over presents on Christmas Eve. For our Santa here is just an ordinary man, and his only magic is his compassion and generous spirit. And who knows, the world can be full of Santas. All it takes is love and enough presents. So settle in. Wrap yourself in your own soft blankets. Light a candle or two, if you can do so safely and with your parents' permission, and let the snow fall outside your window. For this is a story to be enjoyed in the quiet of winter nights, when the world is still, and the only sound is the soft rustle of the snow falling. It is a story of a polar bear named Paul, or Poala in Sami, and the quiet man who, with the help of his friends, brings warmth and light to the coldest time of the year. The wind swept across the snowy landscape, a jacket so cold it could freeze the breath in your lungs. High up in the northern wilderness of Finnmark, Norway, Ravnar was making his way through the snow-covered trees. His large fur-lined boots crunched through the thick drifts as his reindeer pulled the small sled behind him, loaded with supplies for the long winter ahead. His face was weathered from years of life in the wild, but his eyes, sharp and bright, scanned the horizon with purpose. Ravnar had always felt at home in the wilderness. He had learned from his father and his father before him the ways of the Sami people, living in harmony with the land, the animals, and the seasons. And though the winters were harsh and the land unforgiving, he carried with him a deep respect for all living things, especially those creatures that called the Arctic their home, most of all, the majestic bear they called God's dog. It was on one such winter journey, many years ago, that Ravnar met a man walking alone through the snow, wearing a simple woolen coat, his boots worn and wet. It was strange to see a traveler so far out in the wilderness, and stranger still to find him without a sled or reindeer of his own. Ravnar approached the man cautiously. "You are far from any village," he said in Sami, watching the man's face for recognition. The man smiled, his eyes warm, his beard frosted with ice. "I am," he replied, switching to Norwegian. "I seem to have lost my way. My name is Nicholas, but some call me Santa." Ravnar raised an eyebrow. "Santa, you say?" The man shrugged. His cheeks reddened from the cold. "A name given to me by the children of the villages I visit in winter. I bring them gifts, you see, just a simple tradition." Ravnar studied him for a moment longer, then gestured to his sled. "Come, the cold will take you if you stay out here much longer." As they journeyed together, Santa told Ravnar about his work, traveling from village to village, bringing small handmade gifts to children during the long, dark winter. He wasn't a grand figure, not like the stories had painted him. He is a simple man, small in stature but large in heart, dressed in the modest attire of a local villager. There was no magic sleigh, no flying reindeer, just a man with a love for bringing joy to others, moving through the snowy landscape quietly and without much fuss. Seeing Joki, his sole reindeer fly, would be something, though. Ravnar found himself liking the man's company. There was a warmth to him, a kindness that reminded Ravnar of the way his own family lived, simply but full of love. It was on that very journey, as they made their way back to Ravnar's home, that they heard it, the faint cry of an animal somewhere in the distance, muffled by the wind. Ravnar stopped his sled, tilting his head to listen. The sound was weak, but unmistakable. A cry for help. Without a word, Ravnar set off toward the sound, with Santa close behind. As they approached, they saw it, a small bundle of white fur, barely distinguishable from the snow. A young cub, no more than a few hours old, shivering and weak, alone in the snow. Its mother, it seemed, was nowhere to be found, or at least any other tracks in the new fallen snow. Ravnar knelt beside the cub, his heart heavy. The Sami believed in the sacredness of all creatures, but polar bears were held in special reverence, so much so that they wouldn't utter the term polar bear, as these animals were known to the Sami as God's dog, and to see one so young, abandoned and close to death stirred something deep within him. "We cannot leave him," Santa said quietly, kneeling beside Ravnar. "He will not survive the night." Ravnar nodded, his mind already made up. He gently lifted the cub into his arms, feeling the fragile warmth of its small body against his chest. "He will come with us," he said, his voice soft but resolute. When they arrived at Ravnar's home, the children, Liegi and Gunnar, rushed to the door to greet them. their eyes widening at the sight of the tiny cub nestled in their father's arms. "A bear cub!" Gunnar exclaimed, his face glowing with excitement. "Is he ours, father?" Ravnar smiled gently, setting the cub down by the fire, where it curled up gratefully in the warmth. "He is ours to care for, but not ours to keep. He belongs to the land, like all creatures. When he's old enough, he can come and go as he please." The family gathered around the little cub, and over the next few weeks they nursed him back to health. The children, with their innocent hearts, gave him a name, Poala, which means Paul in English. And though he was a bear, the family treated him as one of their own. The Sami believed that kindness to all creatures, especially those in need, was a reflection of the love and respect they had for the world around them. Santa stayed with the family for a few days, helping where he could and growing fond of the bear cub. He and Ravnar spent long hours talking by the fire, sharing stories of their travels and their hopes for the future. There was a quiet understanding between them two men from different walks of life, united by a shared love of nature and the joy of giving. Santa and the family drank cocoa and took turns holding the cub. When it came time for Santa to continue his journey, he promised to return each winter to visit the family and help with their traditions of giving and to check on Poala. And so the bond between Santa and Ravnar was forged, with Paul the bear as their companion, a symbol of the wild and the warmth of home. And from that day on, Paul became not only a part of Ravnar's family, but also a faithful friend and companion to Santa Claus, joining him each winter on his journeys to bring joy to children across the land. As the years passed, Paul grew strong and tall, his thick white fur blending seamlessly with the snow that blanketed the land. Each spring, when the ice melted and the rivers began to flow again, Paul would venture out into the wilderness on his own. He would spend the warmer months hunting and roaming through the vast, untouched landscapes of the north, always returning to Ravnar's home to bask in the warmth of his Sami family during the summer. In the autumn, though, something inside him would stir. The days would grow shorter, the air crisp and cool, and Paul knew it was time to leave. Every year, just as the first snowflakes began to fall, Paul would make his way through the forest, past frozen lakes and across icy fjords to find Santa. Santa didn't live at the North Pole, at least not this Santa, as so many stories claimed. No, that's just ocean and ice. In fact, Santa's home was hidden somewhere between Drubak, Norway, and Rovaniemi, Finland, a place nestled deep within the wintry wilderness where few people ever ventured. And not so much hidden as in tune with nature. It was a humble cottage, much like Ravnar's, with wooden beams and a thatched roof surrounded by snow-covered trees. This was where Santa prepared for his yearly journey, gathering small handmade gifts to deliver to the children in the nearby villages. Paul would arrive just as the cold settled in, his large paws crunching through the snow as he approached Santa's cottage. The two had developed a quiet, unspoken bond over the years, one that didn't require words. Santa would greet Paul with a smile, a gentle pat on the head, and together they would begin their winter work. On the surface, the work seemed simple. Santa's role was to bring joy to the children, leaving small presents on doorsteps or by the fireside on winter nights. But to Santa, it was much more than that. It was about spreading kindness, about bringing warmth to the coldest, darkest time of the year. Paul, with his quiet strength and gentle nature, was the perfect companion for this journey. Though he couldn't speak, his presence was enough comforting, reassuring, and always there. And so, each winter, the two would set off on their yearly travels. Santa's sleigh wasn't the grand, magic vehicle that so many stories described. It was a simple wooden sled, pulled by a single reindeer, a mischievous and stubborn creature named Jockey, who often caused more trouble than help. Paul would walk beside the sled, his massive paws leaving deep tracks in the snow, and Santa would guide the reins, laughing at the reindeer's antics. Santa had money from his family, and he and his half-brother Eric had taken a different path in life. In a world of snow and darkness, it's easy to get lost in the night without a guiding star. And they would make toys for children during most of the year, and Santa would then start to deliver toys in late October. Santa would make many trips back and forth home to load more gifts, only one per child, mostly made of wood or stone, or simply a gift of a fruit like an apple or orange. Some may be paper and pencils or a paint set, or a statue of animals or trolls. And then, be on his way to a different village. He would continue until the Feast of the Epiphany, when he would return home to build more gifts with Eric until next Christmas. Their travels took them through deep forests, across frozen rivers, and into small, remote villages where children waited with eager hearts. Santa, always modest and shy, would leave the gifts quietly, often unnoticed, slipping away before anyone could see him. He didn't want praise or attention. He simply wanted to bring a little light to the darkness of winter. One year, as they stopped in a small village in Sweden, Paul couldn't resist poking his nose into the open door of a cottage, curious about the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from inside. The children inside shrieked in surprise, but their fear quickly melted into delight when they realized the enormous bear was friendly. They rushed to the door, offering Paul bits of bread and laughing as his large tongue licked their tiny hands. Santa chuckled from behind his sled, shaking his head at Paul's antics. "Always the charmer," Santa said, giving Paul a playful pat. "Come on, we've got more gifts to deliver." And so, their journey continued, filled with small moments of joy, laughter, and warmth. Santa's work, though simple, carried a weight of love and kindness that spread through every village they visited. He wasn't the grand figure that so many imagined. He didn't have a list, or magical powers, or a team of elves. Well, Eric was kind of short. But in his quiet way, Santa brought happiness to those who needed it most. And Paul was always by his side, a reminder of the deep connection between man, animal, and the land they shared. As the long winter nights stretched on, the bond between Santa and Paul grew stronger. They were more than just companions. They were friends, united by their love for the children, the wild places of the north, and the quiet beauty of the season. Most years, after their journey was complete, Paul would return to Ravnar's family in Finnmark, where the fire would be waiting, the children eager to hear about his adventures. He would settle by the hearth, surrounded by those he loved, basking in the warmth of home until spring returned once again. Life at Santa's cottage was never dull, especially with Paul, Jockey the reindeer, and Santa's half-brother Eric, who everyone affectionately called the elf. Though not an elf in the magical sense of the word, Santa's half-brother was a small man, a head shorter than most, and full of energy. His name was Eric, and though he lacked the usual size of a grown man, his heart was enormous. Eric helped Santa with everything from making gifts to tending the reindeer and mending the sled. Eric's size may have been smaller than most, but his personality more than made up for it. He was always moving, always talking, and always full of ideas, some more sensible than others. He had a tendency to get into mischief, especially when it came to the reindeer, who was a bit of a trickster himself. The reindeer, named Hygge, had a mind of his own. Unlike the calm, obedient reindeer of myth, Hygge was stubborn, mischievous, and always causing trouble. Whether it was knocking over a stack of presents or disappearing just as Santa was ready to set off on his journey, Hygge kept everyone on their toes. On a particularly memorable day, while preparing for the winter journey, Eric decided to teach Hygge a new trick. He thought it would be helpful if the reindeer could leap over obstacles while pulling the sled. Santa, always patient, raised an eyebrow at the idea, but allowed Eric to try. Paul watched from the side, his large head resting on his paws as he lounged in the snow, curious but unbothered. Eric set up a small wooden fence in front of the sled and urged Hygge to leap over it. Hygge, however, had other ideas. Instead of jumping over the fence, he simply ran through it, sending wooden planks flying in every direction. Eric leapt out of the way, his arms flailing as he tumbled into the snow. "He's got spirit, I'll give him that," Eric said, laughing as he pulled himself up, brushing snow from his clothes. Paul let out a low, rumbling sound that could only be described as a bear's version of a chuckle. Santa shook his head, a soft smile on his face. "Perhaps we'll skip the jumping lessons this year, Eric." Though Hygge could be troublesome, he had a good heart and always found his way back when it was time for the big journey. Paul, too, seemed to have a soft spot for the reindeer, even though Hygge's antics sometimes tested his patience. They made for an unusual team: the gentle bear, the stubborn reindeer, the energetic elf, and the quiet, thoughtful Santa. But together, they worked in harmony, each playing their part in the yearly tradition. One night, just before they were set to leave for their journey, Eric decided to take Paul on a little adventure. Eric, ever curious and always full of ideas, had heard of a special glade deep in the forest where the aurora borealis could be seen in all its grandeur. He thought it would be the perfect place for a quiet moment of reflection before the busy night ahead. "Come on, Paul," Eric said, nudging the large bear with his elbow. "Let's see the lights." Paul, always up for a good adventure, rose to his feet and followed Eric into the snowy forest. The night was cold, but the sky was clear, the stars twinkling like diamonds above them. The snow crunched beneath their feet, well, beneath Eric's feet. Paul's massive paws made barely a sound as they padded through the snow. They walked for what felt like hours, the forest growing darker and quieter around them. Finally, they reached the clearing. The trees opened up into a wide, snowy clearing, and overhead, the sky came alive with streaks of green, purple, and blue. The northern lights danced across the sky, their colors swirling and shimmering like magic. Eric stood in awe, his breath catching in his throat. "Beauty like this is a sight to behold," he whispered. Paul sat beside him, his large form casting a shadow on the snow. He gazed up at the lights, his dark eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. Though Paul couldn't speak, the look in his eyes said everything. There was a deep peace in this place, a quiet that seemed to stretch across the stars and into their hearts. After a while, Eric sat down next to Paul, leaning against the bear's warm fur. "You know," he said softly, "I think we're pretty lucky, Paul. Not everyone gets to see things like this. And not everyone has a friend like you." Paul nudged Eric gently, his nose cold against Eric's cheek. The two sat together in silence for a long time, watching the northern lights until they faded into the early hours of the morning. When they finally returned to the cottage, the fire was still crackling, and Santa was waiting for them with a warm smile. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice full of warmth. Eric nodded, his face glowing. "Oh, we did. More than we expected." Paul lumbered over to the hearth, settling down in his usual spot near the fire. Santa patted his head gently. "Good bear," he said softly, and Paul let out a contented rumble, closing his eyes as he drifted off to sleep. The night before their journey was always filled with moments like this, quiet, peaceful, full of the warmth of family and friends. It was a time of rest and reflection, of sharing stories by the fire and soaking in the deep sense of hygge that filled the cottage. And so, as the snow fell gently outside and the northern lights faded into the dawn, Santa, Paul, Eric and Jockey prepared for another winter of adventure, bringing joy to the world, one small gift at a time. One winter, as the snow piled high and the wind howled through the trees, Ravnar and his family made the long journey from their home in Finnmark to visit Santa's cottage. It had been several years since they'd seen Santa and Paul, and this visit had become a cherished tradition. Lotta, Ravnar's wife, had made beautiful Sami clothing for the children to wear, and the family had packed gifts of their own to share with Santa and his companions. The children, Gunnar and Liegi, were especially excited to see Paul. They had grown up alongside the bear, and though Paul spent much of his time with Santa in the winter, he was still part of their family. They missed him during the cold months, and they couldn't wait to tell him all about their summer adventures. The journey was long and difficult, the cold biting at their faces as they traveled through the snow-covered wilderness. But the thought of seeing Santa and Paul again kept their spirits high. When they finally arrived at the cottage, the warm glow of the firelight spilling out through the windows was a welcome sight. Santa opened the door, his face lighting up in a smile as he saw the family. "Ravnar, Lotta, children, welcome," he called out, stepping aside to let them in from the cold. Paul, who had been dozing by the hearth, immediately lifted his head and lumbered over to greet the family. Liegi threw her arms around the bear's thick neck, laughing as Paul nuzzled her with his cold nose. The warmth of the cottage enveloped them as they settled in by the fire. Santa and Eirik prepared a meal, while Ravnar and his family shared stories of their time apart. The Sami family had always been close to nature, and their tales were filled with details of the land, the migration of the reindeer, the changing seasons, and the beauty of the midnight sun. The cottage was filled with laughter and the gentle sound of the fire crackling, the air thick with the sense of hygge that Santa's home was known for. But not everyone welcomed the Sami family's visit with the same warmth. As word spread through the small village nearby that Santa had guests, one of the villagers spied on the cabin, whispering to himself. Though Santa was beloved by the children, There were those who still held prejudices against outsiders, particularly towards the Sami people, whose traditions and way of life were often misunderstood. One evening, as Santa and Eirik prepared for the final leg of their gift delivery, the villager approached the cottage. Ravnar was outside feeding the reindeer when he noticed the angry villager approaching. The villager's expression was cold, and there was an uncomfortable tension in the air. The tall figure, wrapped in heavy furs, stepped forward. "We heard you had visitors, Santa," he said, his voice thick with suspicion. His eyes shifted to Ravnar, narrowing as he took in the Sami man's traditional dress. "Is it true that you've invited them into your home?" Santa, ever calm and gentle, stepped outside. "Yes," he said simply. "This is my dear friend Ravnar and his family. They've traveled a long way to visit." The man's frown deepened. "They don't belong here. We don't need their kind in our village. The Sami, they're different. Their ways are strange. We don't trust them." After the tall man, wrapped in heavy furs, spoke, suspicion lacing his voice, Ravnar felt the tension rising in the cold air. He could sense the unease in the villager as he eyed him and his family with mistrust. It wasn't the first time Ravnar had encountered prejudice, and though it stung, he knew that anger or confrontation would only make things worse. Ravnar stood tall, his expression calm but firm. He was a man of few words, and he chose his next carefully, knowing the situation needed more than just Santa's kindness. It needed understanding and patience. With a slow, deliberate gesture, Ravnar extended his open hands, palms up as a sign of peace. "We come in friendship," he said, his voice steady and respectful. "Our ways may be different, but we share the same earth, the same skies. Just as you have traditions passed down through your people, so do we. We mean no harm." The tall man crossed his arms, still wary, but something in Ravnar's demeanor, the quiet strength, the dignity, seemed to give him pause. "Different doesn't always mean welcome," the man muttered, though his tone had lost some of its harshness. Ravnar glanced at Santa, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Then, addressing the villager directly, Ravnar spoke again, his voice carrying a quiet wisdom. "The land teaches us to live together. The animals, the seasons, the wind, they know no boundaries. We live by their rhythms, and we respect them. We've come to visit our friends, to share in the warmth of the season. We ask nothing more." There was a long silence as the villager shifted uneasily. He looked uncertain, his initial suspicion wavering in the face of Ravnar's calm demeanor. Behind him, Santa remained quiet, allowing Ravnar's words to settle over the villager like the falling snow. It was then that Paul, who had been watching the exchange from the doorway, padded out into the snow. His presence was imposing, large and strong, with an air of quiet dignity. The villager fell silent as the bear moved to stand beside Ravnar and Santa, his dark eyes watching them calmly. Paul didn't growl or bare his teeth. He didn't need to. His silent strength was enough. The villager, who had always respected the wild creatures of the north, seemed unsure how to react to the sight of the massive bear standing protectively beside the Sami man. Santa placed a hand on Paul's fur, looking back at the villager. "We are all connected," he said quietly, his voice carrying over the cold air. "We share this land, this world. There is no place for fear or hatred here, only love and understanding." For a long moment there was silence. The villager shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the snow, his initial bravado faltering under the weight of Santa's quiet wisdom. Eventually, the villager cleared his throat. "Perhaps I've been too hasty," he muttered, though his tone was begrudging. "But you should be careful, Santa. Not everyone sees things the way you do." Then one of the younger villagers, a man with bright eyes and a softer expression, ran to the other villager and stepped forward to speak out against the villager's anger. "He's right," he said, his voice breaking the tension. "We all live on the same land. The Sami care for the reindeer and the forests. They're not so different from us." Ravnar dipped his head slightly, acknowledging the man's words without pushing further. "We ask for no special treatment," he replied. "Only the same kindness you would offer any guest." Santa's gaze softened, but there was a firmness in his voice. "Everyone is welcome here. Ravnar and his family are good people, kind, generous, and respectful. They are no different from you or me." The tall man grunted and turned away, his suspicions not fully dissolved, but the hostility had eased. The other villager lingered for a moment, offering Ravnar a small smile before he too returned to the village. As they disappeared into the distance, Ravnar let out a quiet breath, grateful the situation had not escalated. Santa stepped forward, placing a hand on Ravnar's shoulder. "Well done, my friend," he said softly. Ravnar let out a long breath, glancing at Santa. "Thank you, old friend. I didn't want trouble for you." Santa shook his head, smiling softly. "There is no trouble in standing up for what's right, Ravnar. The world is full of different people, different ways of living. But kindness is universal. We must remind others of that, even when it's hard." Ravnar smiled faintly. "It is hard to change hearts overnight," he replied. "But sometimes a little patience and understanding are enough to start." The two men stood together in the snow, their friendship stronger than ever, knowing that the real battle against fear and prejudice wasn't won in a single moment, but in the quiet, steady acts of compassion and respect over time. That night, as they gathered around the fire once more, the tension of the encounter faded, replaced by the warmth of family and friendship. Liegi and Gunnar snuggled up beside Paul, who had resumed his place by the hearth, and Eirik told stories of the mischief he and Yoki had caused over the years. The firelight flickered against the walls, the soft glow filling the cottage with a sense of peace and belonging. No matter what the world outside thought, within these walls, love and kindness reigned. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. The winters had always been harsh in the north, but over the years they began to change. Ravnar and his family noticed it first. The summers were growing hotter, and the ice that once stretched across the landscape for most of the year was retreating earlier each season. The rivers thawed sooner, the reindeer herds migrated differently, and even the animals in the wild seemed uneasy with the shifting weather. Santa, too, noticed the changes. Each winter seemed shorter, the snow thinner and the cold less biting. He would often stand outside his cottage, looking out over the hills, a deep furrow of concern on his brow. "The world is warming," he would say to Paul, who sat beside him, his large frame pressed against Santa's for warmth. "And it's happening faster than we'd hoped." Eric nodded in agreement and added, "Too many years of climate denialism and fossil fuel profits, and not enough mitigation." For Paul, The warmer seasons meant that his yearly spring journey back to Ravnar's family became more difficult. Where once he could rely on thick ice and plenty of seals to hunt, now the ice was thinner, the waters warmer, and the prey harder to find. Paul adapted as best he could. He was a strong, resilient bear after all, but each spring brought new challenges. One spring, after an especially mild winter, Paul set off on his usual journey home. The snow had already begun to melt, and the ice on the rivers was fragile beneath his paws. He moved carefully, his instincts guiding him, but the world felt different now, less familiar, more dangerous. As Paul traveled, the landscape changed around him. The once frozen lakes were now open water, and the snowfields were dotted with patches of bare earth. The warmer temperatures made hunting difficult, and Paul found himself growing weaker as the days passed. He continued onward, determined to return to Ravnar and the family he loved. By the time Paul reached the edge of the forest near Ravnar's home, he was exhausted. His usually strong legs trembled beneath him, and his thick fur, once so protective in the cold, felt matted, heavy, and hot. He paused at the edge of the forest, his dark eyes scanning the familiar landscape. The Sami home was just ahead. He could smell the wood smoke from the hearth, hear the distant call of the reindeer, but his body was failing him. Paul collapsed onto the soft earth, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He closed his eyes, the sounds of the world fading into the quiet hum of nature around him. He had made it home almost. It was Ravnar who found him. He had been out with Gunnar, checking on the reindeer, when they spotted Paul lying at the edge of the trees. Ravnar's heart sank. He had known the winters were getting harder for the bear, but he hadn't expected this. "Paul," Ravnar whispered, kneeling beside the great bear. Paul opened his eyes, his gaze meeting Ravnar's with a quiet understanding. There were no words exchanged. There didn't need to be. Ravnar gently placed a hand on Paul's head, his fingers tangling in the thick fur that had once been so warm and strong. Gunnar stood nearby, his young face filled with a mixture of confusion and sadness. He had grown up with Paul. He had never imagined a world without him. But now, as he watched his father kneel beside the bear, he understood, in the way children sometimes do, that this was goodbye. Gunnar ran to Paul, and he and Ravnar's hugged the bear. The night sky was filled with the dapple and hues of northern lights, much like that night with Eric. Did Paola think of Eirik and Nicholas? We may never know. Ravnar took Gunnar's shoulder and said, "Go home, I be there soon." Ravnar didn't have the heart to tell the rest of the family right away. He stayed with Paul as the sun set, the world growing quiet and still around them. When he finally returned home, he told Lotta, Liegi, and Gunnar the truth. Paul was gone. The family gathered that night in the warmth of their Sami home, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. There were no grand gestures of grief, no loud displays of sorrow, only the quiet, shared mourning of a family who had lost someone they loved. Liegi wept softly into her mother's lap, while Gunnar sat staring into the fire, his heart heavy with a sadness he had never known before. Ravnar sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the flames. He had always known this day would come. No one could live forever, not even a bear as strong and noble as Paul. But knowing didn't make it easier. That spring, The family buried Paul in a quiet spot near the lake where Paul had once saved Liegi. It was a place Paul had loved, a place of peace, where the water shimmered in the sunlight and the trees whispered softly in the breeze. They marked the spot with stones, arranging them in a circle, a simple tribute to the bear who had been part of their lives for so many years. As they stood by the water, Ravnar spoke softly to his children. Paul may be gone, but his spirit will always be with us. He was more than just a bear. He was a reminder of the bond we share with the land, with the animals, with each other. His kindness, his strength, his love, they live on in our hearts. The family stood in silence for a long time, the sound of the water lapping gently against the shore, filling the air. The grief was heavy, but there was also a deep sense of peace, a feeling that Paul's journey had come full circle, and that he was now part of the land he had loved so much. When word reached Nicholas about Paul's passing, he and Eirik felt the loss deeply. Paul had been their companion, their friend, and their connection to the wild places of the north. Without Paul, the winters felt a little colder, the snow a little quieter, but Nicholas knew, as Ravnar did, that Paul's legacy was one of love and kindness, and that would never fade. In the years that followed, Nicholas continued his journeys, spreading joy and warmth to the children of the north. But now, when he looked out over the snowy hills, he often thought of Paul, the quiet strength of the bear, the bond they had shared, and the love that had carried them through so many winters. The world was changing, and Nicholas knew that he too would need to change with it. But he also knew that the spirit of the north, the spirit of the Sami people, of the animals, of the land itself, would endure, just as Paul's memory would endure in the hearts of those who had known and loved him. And so, as the snow fell gently over the land, Nicholas, Ravnar, and the family carried Paul's spirit with them, a reminder that even in a changing world, love and kindness would always find a way to endure.
In the snowy north where the cold winds blow, lived a polar bear cub in the frosty glow. Ravnar found him, shivering small, brought him home, the best gift of all. Oh, Paul, the polar brave and true, with the Ravnar family love, he knew through the winter night they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. Santa came calling one frosty eve, with a sleigh of toys tucked up his sleeve. He saw Paul's heart so big and kind. Come with me, there's joy to find. Oh, Paul, the polar brave and true, with the Ravnar family love, he knew through the winter night they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. The snowy forests and icy streams, Paul and Santa spread Christmas dreams, with a swish of sleigh and a jingle bell. They brought joy to every child's tale. Oh, Paul, the polar brave and true, with the round our family love, he knew through the winter nights they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. There Sami villages by the firelight's glow. Paul danced with the children in the falling snow. He carried gifts with a hearty cheer, making Christmas magic year by year. In Sami villages by the firelight's glow, Paul danced with the children in the falling snow. He carried gifts with a hearty cheer, making Christmas magic year by year. Oh, Paul, the polar brave and true, with the rod in our family love, he knew through the winter night they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. When the night was done and the stars grew dim, Paul returned to his family snug with them, with Santa's thanks and reindeer's bow. Paul knew Christmas was forever now. Oh, Paul, the polar bear, brave and true, with the rod of family love, he knew through the winter nights they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. Santa came calling one frosty eve, with a sleigh of toys tucked up his sleeve. He saw Paul's heart so big and kind. Come with me, there's joy to find. Oh, Paul, the polar bear, brave and true, with the rod of family love, he knew through the winter night they'd always care for Paul, the playful polar bear. Through the snowy forests and icy streams, Paul danced with the children in the falling snow. He carried gifts with a hearty cheer, making Christmas magic year by